Welcome to Hanson Regan's LinkedIn Live.
The show that interviews IT industry experts to share their experience and minefield of program and project management.
Our guests will deliver practical tips and advice on delivering successful projects.
I'm Michael O'Hanlon.
And I'm Glenn Phillips. Today we're talking with Geoff Green about following best practice to avoid common pitfalls. Geoff Green, who has 25 years plus of experience working as a program and project manager, implementing SAP and ERP systems with clients such as JCB, M&S, KP Snacks, Compass Group, and SAP, plus many more, and author of Project Failures and 10 Reasons Why.
Hi, Geoff. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to discuss your experience and knowledge in sharing this with our audience.
Hi, guys. How are you? Okay?
Yeah, not too bad. Very well. In terms of when we mention project failures, what could this look like to a client?
Project failures, probably one of the first symptoms of that would be an out of control issue log. Issue log, so you're continually fighting fires and not knowing how to resolve them. So sort of a runaway issue log, really, and the project manager sort of floundering to actually address those, and probably an out of control budget.
Coming back to the author of the 10 Reasons Projects Fail, I know in there one of the things you mentioned, the reason why projects fail, is weak sponsorship. By weak sponsorship, what do you mean by that? Do you think companies aren't utilising them properly? Are they not listening to them, or just not appointing them at all?
Well, a lot of the times with the large implementations that I do, project companies tend to do them sort of once in a blue moon. So they're probably not that experienced in appointing the right governance to a project, and they'll be looking to the project manager, who's hopefully done it quite a few times, to guide them in how to structure that governance. And if the project manager himself or herself is not that well trained, then they will guide them incorrectly. So which is why when I sort of started 20 odd years ago, I came across a document, I stumbled across a document that someone else had done, and they gave the 10 top reasons why a project failed. And based on those studies done in the 1990s and repeated over time, technology's moved on in leaps and bounds. But the one thing it hasn't evolved is humans. So the real area where project managers must concentrate first is to have a good, sound governance. And governance falls into three topics, really. It's strong sponsorship and a sponsor who is very well connected with the project. Don't have someone who's so senior that they very rarely attend the meetings, or someone that's so junior that can't make decisions, is always overruled. Secondly, clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Which is why I tend to stick to one of the large or the well-established project management methodologies. So it's not governance according to Geoff; it's a governance according to the industry best standards. And the third one is to have anyone who's appointed to senior roles in the governing body that they are empowered to carry out those roles, and they can't be overruled by someone else. So they're the three sort of key elements to good governance. And I say I'd stick. I'm a personal fan of Prince 2. I'm not a Prince 2 pedant by any stretch, because there's a lot of people in the industry, particularly IT industry, who thinks it can be a bit sort of bureaucratic. But the governance model, you can't really beat it, really. And the PMP, the American equivalent of Prince 2, is very similar in Prince, although Prince 2 is a little bit more specific, explicit about the roles, whereas PMP is a little bit more implied about what the roles are, but they are largely the same.
So talking about, you said about project team empowerment and how essential it is. Can you explain a bit more in terms of kind of the cascading empowerment and how it works?
Yeah, so starting at the very top, the project sponsor, he or she is the owner of the business case for the whole project, which underpins the reason of the project being in existence. And then by appointing those roles, the project manager will help the project board be established and have a close relationship with the project sponsor. So in my role, I would appoint the senior user, senior supplier, which is usually a bit of a given, really, and then appoint the project manager, and then there are other team leads. So particularly with the senior user and senior supplier roles, they have to be empowered to do their job, and then they can't attend all of the meetings, of course, so then there would then be user meetings during the design phase, and they have to empower then the people to make decisions on key design decisions about user processes, etc. So they gain their empowerment from the very top, and if there are any issues in meetings where people disagree, then that's an escalation point. I take that up to the project board and say, what's the issue here, and then they can then make a decision. So it's because we can't attend all of the meetings, we have to empower people to make decisions, and that they are confident when they make that decision that they will be supported by the project board.
Perfect.
And sponsors, how important is it that the sponsor is empowered to make decisions and have autonomy, and not always have to refer every decision up the line?
It's key. As we've spoken in the past, I've been introduced to so-called sponsors, and my spider senses tell me this isn't the real person, that the real sponsor lies somewhere else, and that's usually manifests itself later and I do test the sponsor as well to make decisions, to see if they can make decisions, or they have to, oh, by the way, I'll just take that away and refer it upwards, and thinking, all right, you're not a real guy, are you? So,
yeah.
And sometimes, depending on, I'm self-employed, so I have to make it. I have to play the hand that I'm dealt. Sometimes I stick the course and see if I can influence that. On the one case that we've mentioned in the past, it took me more than 12 months to get the real sponsor to attend the steering committee meetings, the project board meetings, and because of that poor relationship between that particular senior manager, who was the so-called sponsor, and the real sponsor, there was friction between the two of them. But once we got the two of them in the room together, they worked together very well, and it was for the benefit, and things went smoothly. So, and it was for the benefit, really. But it was a lot of having to be tactful and mindful of the politics that were going on in that particular organization. So yeah, you have to be a little bit soft skills and what have you, and a lot of that comes with experience. But
in terms of you mentioned as yourself as a project manager who's would not be hands-on, and your main job is to be the project manager rather than trying to do everyone else's jobs as you're working. If the client does use systems integrator who are doing the implementation for the client, should you always have an in-house project manager as well to face off or discuss the project or put things back to the system integrator?
Yeah, this does come up a lot, and I was sort of expecting it. Well, I'll answer that in two ways, by making two assertions, and that is, in a well-managed project, it should comprise a phase for the users to test and formally accept and sign off the solution that it is fit for purpose, and we call that the user acceptance testing phase. And then the second one is that the simple assertion is that the role of the project manager is to manage the project, full stop. There's no asterisk and a footnote to that sentence. The role of the project manager is to manage the project. Therefore, it follows that if the project manager comes from the system integrator, the solution provider, then with the best will in the world, they have a conflict of interest then, in order, when they're managing or trying to manage the user acceptance test, they have a conflict of interest because their employer is the solution provider, and that partiality is further amplified if the systems integrator is on a fixed price contract, because the next stage payment will be on the sign off of user acceptance test. So they don't want those pesky users raising too many bugs, do they? Because they're going to get paid. So how could their project manager manage that? It's a conflict of interest. So I would say that's the main reason why in my opinion, and I think best practice is that you need the project manager to be the client's man, not the third-party implementer's man or woman. One of those large projects, one of my last large implementations, was I had 11 work streams reporting into me, 8 of which were third parties. There was the one main third party, the main systems integrator, and then 7 others who had to adapt and change their system interfaces. Not all, but certainly some of those third party, what I would call work stream team leads, referred to themselves as project managers, but they weren't. I was the project manager. They just reported into me. And none of them could have been the project manager because the project manager was 11 work streams. How could they manage 7 of their competitors and 3 internal teams? They couldn't do it. It was impossible. So those are the reasons why I maintain that the project manager has to be an internal guy or woman.
So in terms of we're talking here about the systems integrator having a project manager, you'd call them a work stream lead. The client themselves,
they call themselves project manager, but really they're a work stream lead.
It's a work stream lead. So in terms of the project manager that you can have in place for these work streams, when would you look to bring them in? Is it right at the start of the project? Is it before?
It's as a project is taking, depending on the relationship, really. When you're thinking of kicking off a project and you want a re-implementation or whatever, then you do, even before you even select the systems integrator, you have the beauty parade, and that they do their pitch, and this is what we can do and what have you, and this is potential scope, etc. And there's all that sort of pre-sales business beforehand as you're building that relationship, and then you're awarding the contract. So you're already building that relationship, and then there's sort of there's a cycle of meetings then internally and externally about what the potential scope could be, and using their experience about, yes, we'll chop this into phases, or we'll do as a big bang, or whatever, based on their experience and their past experiences. So, and I've been either side of that fence. I've worked for systems integrators where you're trying to advise the client. So yeah, we'll do this in stages because we don't want it to cripple your business, particularly with SAP implementation. I've worked in manufacturing, in retail, which is a 24/7 operation. It's very hard to find a quiet spot in your business calendar of when to go live. So you do tend to try and do more of a phased implementation. With manufacturing industry, there are quiet spots during the year where you can say, right, we'll pick that particular quiet spot. That's the best time to go live. So you do advise the customer as to where that, and then the project then takes its sort of natural scope then. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. In terms of we mentioned previously on kind of potential failures, was finance being a large one. In terms of kind of how clients can actually improve their financial stewardship and project success, what would you say, in your opinion, is the best way to go about this?
Yeah, it's not to confuse like cost center budgets with project budgets, because as a project manager, the sponsor owns the business case. So this project is going to be worth X in cost savings. So as long as you cut the budget to be Y plus a little bit of contingency, and then there are things that are going to happen. Obviously, that contingency is it's a finger in the air, isn't it? So you would have a larger contingency during the design phase, because that's when you're exploring exactly what you're going to implement, and then you can reduce the contingency once you get to sign off the design and you know exactly what you're going to build, because so then you can reduce the contingency. So you've got your budget, and then as far as the project manager is concerned, I'm not a trained accountant, but I know my way around a spreadsheet. So my responsibilities are, I'm reporting to the the sponsor and the project board, the what, the how much, and the when. I'm not interested. I'm not a management accountant. I'm not interested in whose cost center it comes from. I really don't care whether it's capital or revenue. There are some elements of data cleansing which are not capital or revenue. I say I'm not an accountant, but it's important to management accountants, that sort of thing, but not me. I'm not an accountant. So.
Can you help me understand from a non-project point of view, from my point of view, why are there always so many unforeseen costs? We've seen quite a lot of cases recently in the news. Yeah. Massive unforeseen costs in projects. How do they get these so wrong initially? And
moving goalposts and not being clear about what the objectives are. Then you've got to go back to the poor sponsorship and the actual underlying business case, and being very clear about what you're trying to achieve. The classic one, I would say, it wasn't an IT project, but the back construction project was the Scottish Parliament building, which I think the original budget was something like 50 million, and it ended up costing more than 400 million. So, and we've seen the same with HS2, haven't we? So there's lots of cases where they just move the goalposts as to what they want to do and not being clear on the scope. But it's the management of those milestones, and it probably goes back to poor governance as well, and the original business case.
To link this back to what you were saying in regards to being project managers in early, and clients not often doing massive projects regularly, they're a rare occurrence.
They are.
Do you think by bringing in project managers early from their own side, from a client point of view, would help them plan, design, and have less unforeseen costs?
I would agree. Yeah, I like to be brought in as early as possible to advise the client and to help them shape their governance model. It's not always the case. Sometimes I'm brought in, lots of the times I'm brought in to actually help save a failing project. So I've been the sort of second, third, or fourth project manager. So you're coming down the line, but it's nice to get in early and to advise the project.
And in terms of going into, I suppose, project failures, like you said, you've done it, coming in as, say, the second or third project manager, what are the steps in terms of do you go back to the beginning and start the whole process again, or where does that sit?
No, you probably wouldn't be thanked for that. You try and fix things on the fly, really, because you got an ongoing project you're going to try and deliver. Start by looking at the issue log and see where the main issues are. You can't fix everything in one go. Go back to the risk register, and with also whether is the governance right, and more than likely it probably isn't. So you try and sort of put sticking plasters on that, if I'm honest, but because you still have to deliver, and it's hard, and you're juggling lots of balls in the air, and yeah.
So the main thing is about the governance board being kind of prime importance, and clients either deciding on the correct people, but then when there's third parties involved, do they ever get part of the governance board? Is it a good idea? And if it is, why is it, or why is it not?
Well, if you think about it, a third party coming in, their business case for getting involved is totally different from the client's. Their business case is to make as much margin out of that particular client as possible. That's the top and bottom of it. They're not a charity. That's what they're there for, to make money. So, and also, if you've got a third party which is not performing, you might want to discuss them. The only real meeting that you've got of those people is the project board / steering committee, and you might want to discuss their performance. So no, don't have them. It's a bad idea to have them involved. You might want to invite them for a particular meeting if you want to pick their brains about something.
Yeah,
but it's by invitation only. They should not be part of the project board. It's another thing as well. You mentioned about the project board is that. Well, a favourite saying of mine is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There was one particular client where I explained to the sponsor what the different roles were. And the senior user represents the user community, senior supplier represents the technology, if you like, usually the IT director. But because of the history of that particular client, they had multiple, and usually the good person to be a senior user on a large ERP implementations is usually someone like the finance director or a senior financial controller. But because of the history of that particular client, they used to have multiple legal entities, but then they consolidated down to one. So they wanted the so-called finance director of all of their 6 divisions to be senior users. Well, of course, it was like herding cats. You could never get them all to the same meeting, and because their diaries always clashed, and then they always disagreed. So I said, no, this is a bad idea. You should have one of them. Who is the only one? But they couldn't agree, and it was to do with the politics of the client. So they thought they were doing the right thing by having a committee, a lot of senior users, but it was always a bad thing. So.
You talk a lot about defining the roles, and when you're coming into a project and it's going wrong and it's almost like a firefight. Is that one of the first things you step back, look at what everybody's doing, and then reassess and look to redistribute?
If you think about it, you've got to understand the difference. There is a difference between a role and a job. And so many companies take their existing departmental structure with job titles on it. And if you think about it, every single company in the world has a different departmental structure. It's specific to their company at that point in time. So people with like head of IT systems, head of this or head of that or whatever, they try and take that existing departmental structure and create a project structure from it. Well, that's the wrong starting point, because that departmental structure was developed for a particular reason. A project structure is different. It's temporary, and they're role-based, not job-based. So it's the wrong starting point. You've got to understand, one person, an individual, can hold many roles. In a very small project, the sponsor and senior user can be the same person in a very small project. If you had a large program, for example, then you could have the senior supplier for UK being the UK IT director. You could have the senior supplier for the implementation in the Republic of Ireland also being the UK IT director. So they can hold, it's a different hat that you wear. So don't take your existing departmental job-based structure and try and create a project out of it. Don't. Go back to one of the project management methodologies. I say, not project management according to Geoff. Use Prince2, PMP, whatever you've been trained in. Use their structure, their roles.
And in terms of those kind of roles and responsibilities, and internal and external, in terms of kind of the external control on these project outcomes, is that kind of a big kind of a big thing that happens there, where it gets confused of roles and responsibilities between the client
Roles
and
and responsibilities is a biggie,
third parties?
Yeah. When you say external controls, or ultimately the project is the responsibility of the project sponsor. He or she owns the success or failure of the project is their responsibility, because they own the business case. They can sack the project manager, for example, which has happened. That they own ultimate responsibility for the project. But as far as roles and responsibilities, which is why I like Prince2, because it's very explicit about what those roles are. If you hold the title of sponsor and it's bullet pointed, these are your responsibilities, and that's what I like about it. I say in PMP, which I've mentioned in the past, it's more implied rather than explicit.
Yeah. Whereas this is far more clear cut.
Absolutely,
there's no reading between the lines.
No.
This is where you are on, this is where I am.
And Prince has been around for 30 plus years. So they've taken input from hundreds of thousands of projects to come up with those definitions. So yeah, I can open chapter 14, point at it and say, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lot about the issue log and the risk register.
Yeah.
How do you utilize those if a project's going wrong?
Well, certainly the categorization of the issues, what's happening, when issues were raised, who they're escalated to. Well, are they a sort of issue that keeps bouncing around? Are we getting when an issue is raised, is it getting resolved, or does the date keep getting put back? And then that sort of tells you, hang on a second, why is it not getting resolved? Are the people who I'm escalating to, are they not empowered to make a decision on this? Do we, and it does point back to weaknesses in the governing structure if issues are still hanging around and getting bounced around. There's another thing that happens on projects is the difference between an action and an issue. And the only difference really is spelling, because an action is something you have to do by a certain date, and it was raised by a person and it must be resolved by a person. Well, that's, you could say the same about an issue and an action. They're two sides of the same coin. So I put actions as well in the issue log. So
there will have been projects where you've worked on where there are already things failing and gone wrong. Processes and procedures you've used to rectify them, and also to learn for future projects.
This goes back to the post-implementation review, I think, is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
One particular client was keen on doing these. It was part of their processes that every project had a post-implementation review, which was good. I think it's a good thing, as long as they follow up and learn by what we've found. So many companies go through that process of post-implementation review and then sort of just put it on the shelf, tick the box, yeah, we've done that, and they don't learn. It all depends on the politics, doesn't it, and the culture within the company. Some companies just like, yeah, it was painful, we went live, let's just park that and move on. So yeah.
So in terms of, you've done many projects throughout your career, what would you say kind of the percentage of companies that do kind of in-depth reviews of projects and actually look to learn from them ultimately?
Sadly, very few, in my experience. I can't speak for all companies, but in my experience, that was just that one particular client that went through the process of a post-implementation review. I'm not so sure on the evidence that they actually learned from it very much afterwards. I did 3 stints at that particular company, and there were still things cropping up on the 3rd time I went there that we picked up the first time 5 years earlier. So read into that what you like.
Why do you think it is clients don't do more of these meetings? I mean, look, I can understand. I don't agree, but I can see that companies forget or they shunt it as a tick box exercise. Why do companies not do them more? As in, the more learning you can do, the more understanding.
You thought so, wouldn't you?
Surely the less unforeseen costs, the less issues, the quicker it's done, and the better it is for them. And eventually you could even lead to sort of in-house projects. But what do you think the reason is why they don't do these themselves?
I think it's personalities and the politics, but certainly in other industries they do. If you look at when there's been in the aircraft industry or in the rail operating industry where there's been an accident, they have these drains up exercises afterwards as to reasons why, and then they learn from it. Maybe in the mining industry, they do actually take on board learnings from previous things that have gone wrong. And I think IT could learn a lot from that, to take it a little bit more seriously.
Certainly, as people move around as well within the IT industry, if you took a great auditing process of a project, you move to another client, you would then try and bring that in because it worked so well at the last. So the more people did it, the more it would kind of spread, and the industry as a whole would improve, would you say? That's
right, and which is one of the things that prompted me to write that document, the 10 top reasons why projects fail, because it's to sort of pass on my learnings. But certainly when I started 25 years ago, I can't say I was, I learned, I've still got the battle scars, the mistakes that I made. And I thought, well, if I'm going to try and make a living out of being a project manager, then I need to find out how to be better at it. There's got to be a science to it. And sure enough, then that's when I stumbled across that document, and the rest is history. So, but yeah, that's what I always have that list of 10 in my head whichever project I'm on, and it's a little checkbox that I run through. So that's how I've learned, and if I can pass that on, then that's great. So yeah, if people want to learn from it, then fine.
In terms of these sort of post-project reviews, who within the client is responsible for making them happen? Who would be the person who could or should be saying, right, we've finished this implementation, we now need to sit down with X, Y, and Z and discuss how we can improve on this should we ever approach something like this again?
The first person I'd pin that on, probably, because we're in the IT industry, I would pin that on the IT director. I would say it's his or her responsibility to make that happen. They might then delegate it down to their head of project who reports into them, depending on the size of the organization, or there might be a PMO lead in their, project management office, that is, who then takes responsibility. But yeah, pin it on the IT director, and then they'll probably delegate it down, depending on the size of the organization.
We've actually got a question that's kind of come in on that one. So
okay,
it actually says, so who should be appointed to the role? Should it be someone from the business rather than the IT systems team?
What, from the learnings? Certainly the user community can play a very important part in that. It all depends, you see. It all depends what sort of things come up. It could be that IT were doing their best during the implementation and the users weren't playing ball. They didn't turn up for meetings, etc., during the design phase. So it could have been that the user community in that particular organization at that time were not taking things seriously. But that's the sort of thing that the project manager should then be escalating during the project to the sponsor and saying, come on, guys, it's the user community that are delaying things and burning the budget and missing our deadlines. And then it goes back to, well, and usually the sponsor is from the user community, not IT. So it goes back to weak sponsorship again. So yeah, it could be the learnings of that particular project. It's a weakness in the user community, but yeah, they certainly have a very important role to play.
So do you think, in terms of the industry, that there's, with these project failures and very few reviews, there's also kind of people trying to hide it, brush it under the carpet?
Yeah.
Is that kind of, I understand there's some politics involved, and what would you say kind of the biggest takeaways of companies either not doing it or why they're not doing it, to name a few?
But as we mentioned in the past, it's politics and people not wanting to be embarrassed by it. So that's why it doesn't happen. So yeah, it's when it is done, it's usually a tick box and put on the shelf, and then people change. People leave organizations, new people come in, they have a reorganization, so it gets forgotten. So sadly.
Yeah. I mean,
there must be companies around there that do the right thing and they do learn from it. But I think they're few and far between, and they should pat themselves on the back if they do it.
Question here. They're asking, would the senior responsible owner be the sponsor? Would they be the person who is the sponsor?
The senior responsible, the sponsor is the person who owns the business case and has been appointed by the business to deliver the project. I say on smaller projects, the sponsor can be the same person as the senior user. In Prince 2 terms, a senior user is the person who owns the user requirements and represents the user community, the people who are going to be the ultimate users of the implementation. I say small projects, it can be one and the same person because it's not a conflict of interest. You would never combine the sponsor with the senior supplier role because that is a conflict of interest.
Right. Okay.
And that's quoting exactly from Prince 2. That's not me spouting. That's Prince 2.
We've got another question coming in just saying, so what does success look like in project management?
Well, success from a project perspective, in a well-structured business case, you would have certain KPIs, so we want to reduce the number of mispicks in the warehouse from X to Y over this period of time. We want to save this amount of money, and sadly as well, we want to reduce headcount from, which is often occurs in ERP, from X to Y. So then once you've implemented, then you would then hopefully measure against that. And did we achieve the KPIs that we set out in the business case? So have we achieved success? So it should be an empirical process, not a subjective process. So then you can actually, because there's an old adage, isn't it? If you can measure it, you can manage it. So it's no good saying, I think it was a success, but if you can actually prove it by the numbers, then you can prove it's a success. So as far as project management's concerned, you're only measured on whether the project went live and there wasn't a disaster, and because often once there's been the implementation, I leave after the first period end. I leave the project, but it could be the business case is that they want to make savings over the forthcoming 12 months. Well, I'm no longer there, so I can't tell. So yeah, it's the sponsor who owns that responsibility.
Question here surrounding the KPIs. I think you've touched on the first part, and you suggest the client has them, and I think the answer is yes. The follow-up is what if they don't have any? How would a project manager be measured, if you like, if there are no KPIs in place specifically?
You can't. It's completely subjective.
Would a project manager ask for KPIs? Say, if you were brought into a project, would you ask the business and say, well, I'm coming in, but I want to know what success looks like for you so I can demonstrate it?
Yeah, I can ask, and certainly come up during the design workshops as to why, because it drives the decision making. Because certainly I can speak for my most experience is SAP. When you're actually designing processes, as to why you design a process in a certain way, it's in order to achieve these savings and to streamline processes. And often, if you don't know why you're doing something, then how can you possibly make that decision? And it improves decision making during that design process. So the better structured the business cases, the more specific it is. It helps during the design phase. Otherwise, it is completely subjective exercise as to say whether some success or not. The large implementation that I referred to before, the large warehouse implementation, my advice to the project board was to delay the go live, and we actually delayed the go live by about 6 months, or slightly more than 6 months. And I was proved right. The implementation partner, who were on a fixed price, were urging to go live earlier, and I said, don't do it. That particular warehouse, without naming any names, was so key to the business of that organization. Had it gone live at the earlier date, it would have failed, and not only it would have failed spectacularly. That particular warehouse supplied parts to all of the UK manufacturing plants, some of the foreign manufacturing, well, all of the foreign manufacturing plants, all of the other satellite warehouses around the world. And it was so key to their organization that had that gone wrong, it would have basically paralyzed their organization. And I would have been on the 6 o'clock news. There would have been wagons across the Midlands, going no further as who they were. And then the chairman would have wanted my head on a spike in the town hall. So that's why I delayed it, and my advice was taken, thankfully, and it went off swimmingly well. I was I was thanked by the senior
Very
management,
nice to hear.
and everyone kept their job, which was great.
Perfect.
I've got another question for you here, Geoff.
Yeah.
How long do you typically advise to spend cleaning data and having it ready for any 2B systems?
Yeah, that's how long's a piece of string. How many
Yeah.
how many systems need their data cleaning? So it can be that you are, if you're going from a new version of the same software, then usually the data is quite straightforward to clean. When you're going from an old legacy system or even multiple old legacy systems into a single system, then there's a lot of data cleansing, because it's not always the same that one piece of data equates to a single other piece of data. It can be 2 to 1, or it can be 2 to 3. So
Yeah.
it's, and you're adding new elements to that data. So it's how long's a piece of string.
So in terms of that, I suppose the piece of string, is that kind of something that when someone's deciding on how long a project's going to take, how much money it's going to cost, if you've got that large data cleansing, data migration process that they're almost guessing a timeline on, is that an area that could go out of control or affect the project at the end?
Yeah, there was a decision about 20 years ago. I was working at a retailer, and the 24/7 365 operation. So we had to make a cutoff. They had 3.6 million customers. Now, we knew that you had to make a decision then on how many customers are we actually going to migrate to the new system, the new SAP system. And they made a cutoff point of, we're going to halve it, because some of these people have been dormant for more than 12 months. Are they ever going to order anything again? Because it was like a wholesale operation. So you have to make those decisions and say, right, we're going to cut off here. But because it was a 365 operation, new customers were being created every day. So it was an iterative process. So cleanse some data, and then, oh God, there's some more data. So we had to clean that again. So it's an iterative process, and you can't, and a 365 operation, when do you say stop, migrate? It's hard.
And in terms of that cleansing and migrating of data, who does that normally fall into? Kind of, is that the client, or is that the system integrator? Are they waiting around? How's that normally?
The systems integrator, because I go back to SAP again. Certainly the new version of SAP. We've got there's a data cockpit, which uses specific technology to help you actually migrate the data. But you do need business input to that. So you'd have it's sensible to have a data migration lead who cleanses the data, but you have to then take decisions on the cleansing of the data and also the archiving of the data, and how much data you're going to take, how much you're not going to take, what's the priorities of the data. So data is a big exercise, very big.
So to wrap things up, Geoff, can you give us your key takeaway tips from this today?
Yes. I've got them written down here. So I'm not a Prince 2 pedant, but I do like the way they structure their governance model. So always use a recognized industry standard project management methodology. Whatever you're trained in, use that particular one. There are methodologies and methodologies. You take something like SAP, for example, using that again, they have their Activate methodology, which used to be called ASAP. That is an implementation methodology. It's not a project management methodology. So you can use Activate in the UK with Prince 2 overlaying it for your governance model. You can use Activate in the United States if your project manager is trained in PMP. So Activate is an implementation methodology, not a project management methodology. So that's an important differentiation. A project can only have one project manager. Don't go for this. I call it nonsense. 2 in a box. I've heard it so many times. It is nonsense, because the client wants one backside to kick. That's it. There's one project manager. There's no confusion. Who's owning this? There's one person. I mentioned to you earlier on, don't confuse a role with a job. So sponsor, senior supplier is a role. Head of IT solutions, head of this, head of that, they're job titles. Okay. So one person can fulfill many roles. And I mentioned before, multiple, one person can fulfill many roles. So you can have a sponsor and senior user being the same person. Don't try and invent new roles like customer project manager, cutover project manager, integration. There's one project manager. They're work streams. Yeah. Don't have third parties on your project board. We mentioned that at the top of the meeting because their business case differs. They want to make as much margin as possible. And I think the last one is don't nest projects within projects. This is where, if you've got a group of projects, they're grouped together in a program and they have different go live dates, but you can't nest a project within a project. You just can't do it. So those are my immediate takeaways.
Thank you very much for your insights, Geoff. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure for us, and I hope you've enjoyed yourself.
Well, yeah. I always enjoy myself when I'm on my soapbox spouting.
Don't we all? So in terms of the audience, so if people can please follow us for more insights in the future, this will be available on LinkedIn, YouTube, and all the various social platforms.
Yeah, and if anyone's got any follow-up questions, they'd like to reach out to Geoff or ourselves, we're more than happy to cover those. Also, if you're watching this and you're looking here and thinking you've got some interesting topics to discuss, reach out. Let's have a chat.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Geoff.
Geoff. I really appreciate taking the time.
Thank you very much, guys.
Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.